Tigris-Euphrates Water Sharing Agreement 2026, Legal, Environmental, and Strategic Implications. Welcome to the channel. I'm Noor Fatima, independent legal and geopolitical analyst with deep expertise on Middle Eastern water security, international law, and regional diplomacy. You're watching on GoFrixty official channel. Today we're unpacking a crucial and often overlooked issue, the Tigris-Euphrates Water Sharing Framework, recent progress toward a draft 2025-2026 agreement between Turkey and Iraq, and the broader implications for water security, regional stability, and international law. Let's know about the rivers and the stakes. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are among the most historically consequential waterways in human civilization, forming the cradle of Mesopotamian civilization. These rivers still sustain millions of lives across Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and to some extent Iran. Both rivers originate in eastern Turkey, flow through Syria, and then into Iraq, where they merge into the Shatt al-Arab before emptying into the Gulf. Unlike some river systems that have well-defined international treaties, the Tigris-Euphrates basin lacks a comprehensive binding water-sharing agreement among all riparian states. Historically, in 1987, Turkey and Syria agreed on a minimum flow for the Euphrates. In 1990, Syria and Iraq entered an accord sharing the Euphrates water at a ratio of 42% to Syria and 58% to Iraq. A 2021 Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, between Turkey and Iraq requested equitable water sharing but lacked enforceable mechanisms. Thus, for decades, discussions have been bilateral and piecemeal, without a full basin-wide joint legal framework. Legal framework and international law. From a legal standpoint, the situation in the Euphrates-Tigris basin reflects broader challenges in international water law. 1. Transboundary watercourses. The UN Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Uses of International Watercourses encourages equitable and reasonable utilization and obligates riparian states not to cause significant harm. However, it does not automatically impose rigid allocation quotas without agreement. Turkey, as the upstream state, emphasizes its sovereignty over waters that originate within its territory, asserting that any use must be based on reasonable, cooperative management rather than fixed downstream entitlements. 2. Lack of binding treaty. Unlike the Nile Basin Initiative or the Indus Waters Treaty, there is no permanent multilateral agreement that exclusively governs the Euphrates-Tigris allocation among Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. This absence has long been a source of legal ambiguity and geopolitical tension. 3. Equity versus historic rights. Iraq has argued that the rivers form the lifeline of its society, agriculture, and economy, and historically its people have depended on these waters for millennia. Iraq's position is that it should have guaranteed minimum flows based on need. Turkey has responded by advocating a basin-wide, needs-based approach grounded in equitable utilization, not historic downstream priority, which complicates traditional downstream demands for fixed water shares. Let's discover the recent progress and 2025-2026 draft agreement. In October 2025, after decades of negotiation and worsening drought conditions, Turkey and Iraq announced a tentative draft framework agreement on water sharing and management of both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This draft, still not finalized as a binding treaty, marks a significant shift from past piecemeal MOUs toward a more structured, cooperative framework. Key points emerging from the draft include recognition of the mutual reliance on the rivers, especially for Iraq, which depends on them for up to 70% of its water supply. Joint water management and coordinated infrastructural cooperation rather than rigid water quotas. Shared efforts to mitigate drought impacts through improved release schedules and data sharing. This draft is not just about volumes. It reflects a broader recognition that climate change, hydrological variability, and regional water scarcity demand cooperative responses rather than unilateral actions. The fact that Turkey and Iraq are moving toward an agreement is significant for several reasons. 1. Easing tensions for years, low downstream flows, largely attributed to technical dam projects in Turkey's southeastern region, have fueled Iraqi grievances. A cooperative framework helps ease political tensions, especially at times when Iraq is also navigating internal challenges and regional diplomatic shifts. 2. Climate change and water scarcity. Severe droughts, rising temperatures, and unpredictable rainfall patterns have intensified scarcity. These environmental pressures make unilateral water control strategies unsustainable and heighten the need for coordinated management. 3. Economic interdependence. The water talks are now part of a broader Turkish-Iraqi cooperation trend, including water infrastructure projects financed by Iraq and built by Turkish firms, a move sometimes described as oil for water collaboration. 4. Reduced risk of conflict. Water scarcity in the Middle East has long been viewed as a potential catalyst for localized unrest or interstate tensions. A shared management approach reduces the risk of bilateral disputes spiraling into larger geopolitical conflicts. While the Turkey-Iraq draft is a breakthrough, the basin includes other riparians: Syria, which receives water from both rivers before they enter Iraq; Iran, which contributes through tributaries to parts of the Tigris basin. There is still no binding trilateral agreement among Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, a gap that leaves long-term legal and diplomatic uncertainty. Syria has historically voiced concerns over equitable access, especially during periods of low flow, further emphasizing the need for a comprehensive, basin-wide treaty beyond the Turkey-Iraq draft. The water crisis goes beyond geopolitics or international law. It directly affects ecosystems, agriculture, urban populations, and cultural heritage. Reduced flows have devastated wetlands like the Mesopotamian marshes, jeopardizing biodiversity. Farmers depend on predictable river water for crops. Water scarcity threatens food security. Urban users in Iraq face intermittent supply as rivers shrink due to upstream damming and climate change. Legal frameworks that fail to factor environmental rights and ecosystem needs will be incomplete. Future agreements must balance humans' right to water with sustainable river management. The Tigris-Euphrates basin has long been a complex geopolitical, legal, and environmental challenge. The 2025-2026 draft water-sharing framework between Turkey and Iraq represents a meaningful shift toward cooperation amid drought and climate stress. Yet, without a binding basin-wide treaty, including Syria and broader multilateral guarantees, legal uncertainties remain. Sustainable solutions must balance equitable legal allocation with environmental protection and socioeconomic stability. That's all for today's analysis. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe GoFrixty official channel so more people can understand the deeper legal and geopolitical implications of global water security. I'm Noor Fatima, and I'll see you in the next update.